The first thing Ariba noticed was the sound. Not the rustling of leaves, not the distant hum of traffic, not even the soft whisper of the wind weaving through marble headstones. It was a man's broken, muffled sobs, raw, unfiltered grief spilling into the quiet daylight, like something that didn't belong there. She froze mid-step. The bouquet of white lilies in her hand trembled slightly as her gaze shifted toward the far corner of the cemetery. And there, kneeling beside a modest grave that looked almost forgotten, was a man in a janitor's uniform, his shoulders shaking as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. Ariba had come here for her father. She hadn't expected to find someone else mourning like this. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to comment, share, and subscribe to Heartfelt Stories. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever. The sun hung gently in the sky, casting soft gold over the cemetery, as if the day itself was trying to comfort the living. Ariba adjusted her sunglasses, though they did little to shield the storm inside her. It had been 5 years since her father passed, and still, visiting his grave felt like reopening a wound that never truly healed. Her father had been everything, her anchor, her moral compass, the one man who never cared about wealth or status. He had built their empire from nothing, but he never let it define him. After his death, Ariba inherited it all: billions, businesses, power. Yet none of it filled the silence he left behind. She walked toward his grave, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. But the crying man pulled her attention again. Something about his grief felt familiar, not performative, not controlled. It was the kind of pain that comes from losing something irreplaceable. She hesitated, then slowly approached. As she drew closer, she noticed details she hadn't at first. The man's uniform was worn, his shoes scuffed. His hands were rough, fingers trembling as they clutched the edge of the gravestone. Beside him sat a small boy, no older than 6, quiet and still, watching his father cry with eyes far too old for his age. The boy didn't speak. He simply placed his tiny hand on the man's back, as if trying to hold him together. Ariba stopped a few feet away, her heart tightening. She glanced at the gravestone. The name etched into it read, Syra Kaleem. There were no flowers, no decorations, just a simple stone, weathered and alone. Something inside Ariba shifted. She stepped closer, her voice soft but steady, asking if everything was okay. The man startled slightly, wiping his face quickly as if ashamed to be seen. He nodded at first, out of habit perhaps, but the truth clung to him too heavily to be hidden. His eyes were red, his expression exhausted, not just from the day, but from a life that had clearly been unkind. He tried to compose himself, explaining in a quiet, uneven voice that the woman buried there was his wife, that he worked here as a janitor now because it was the only way he could afford to stay close to her, that he came every day during his break, just to sit with her, to talk to her, to remember what life used to feel like before everything fell apart. Ariba listened, really listened, and as he spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. His name was Ramiz. He had once been a mechanic, earning just enough to keep his small family afloat. His wife had been the heart of their home, a gentle presence who made even their struggles feel lighter. But illness came quietly, like a shadow creeping in at dusk. By the time they realized how serious it was too late. Medical bills swallowed everything. Savings disappeared. Their home was sold. His job slipped away as he spent more time at hospitals than in the workshop. And when she finally passed, she left behind not just grief, but a life completely undone. Now, it was just him and his son, barely holding on. Ariba felt something crack inside her. She looked at the little boy again, noticing how he stood silently, as if he had already learned that life doesn't always give you the luxury of being a child. His clothes were clean but worn, his shoes slightly too small. And yet, there was a quiet strength in him, a resilience that shouldn't have been necessary at his age. The world felt unfair in that moment, painfully, undeniably unfair. Ariba turned her gaze back to her father's grave, just a few steps away. She remembered his voice, his values, the way he always said that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used to lift others. He had built an empire, yes, but his true legacy was kindness. And suddenly, she knew what he would have done. The decision didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something that had been waiting for her all along. The next few days unfolded quietly, almost invisibly. Ariba didn't make a grand announcement or draw attention to what she was doing. Instead, she began to weave herself into Remy's world in small, meaningful ways. She returned to the cemetery the following day, bringing not just flowers for her father, but for Cyrus' grave as well. She spoke to Remy's again, learning more about his life, his struggles, his hopes that he no longer dared to hope for. She met his son, Zion, who at first was shy but slowly began to open up. He loved drawing, especially pictures of his mother. In every drawing, she was smiling. Ariba saw something in those sketches that moved her deeply, a kind of love that refused to fade. Weeks passed, and then one morning, everything changed. Remy was called into the cemetery office, confusion written all over his face. He feared the worst, that he had done something wrong, that he might lose the one job that kept him close to his wife. But instead, he was handed an envelope. Inside was a job offer, not as a janitor, but as a supervisor in one of Ariba's companies. The salary was more than he had ever earned before. There was also a letter, simple, direct, and signed only with her first name. It spoke of second chances, of dignity, of the belief that a man who could love his family so deeply deserved more than survival. He deserved a future. Remy stood there in disbelief, his hands shaking all over again, but this time for a different reason. When he returned to the cemetery that afternoon, he found Ariba waiting near her father's grave. The sunlight caught her face in a way that made her seem almost unreal, like a moment that didn't quite belong to his life. He didn't know how to thank her. There were no words big enough. But Ariba didn't need them. She simply smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that carried more warmth than anything money could buy. Life didn't transform overnight. It never does. But slowly, steadily, things began to change. Remy's moved into a small but comfortable apartment. Zion started attending a good school where he could finally just be a child again. And Ariba found something she hadn't realized she had been searching for. Purpose. Not in boardrooms or business deals, but in moments like this, in knowing that her father's legacy lived on, not in wealth, but in the lives she could touch. The cemetery visits continued, but they felt different now, lighter, full of quiet conversations and unspoken understanding. And on one particular afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold, Ariba stood between two graves, her father's and Cyrus, and realized that loss and love were not opposites. They were threads of the same story, woven together in ways that shaped who we become. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances. And before this story ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger's kindness changed your life? Because sometimes the most unexpected encounters carry the power to heal what we thought was broken forever. As Ariba turned to leave that day, she glanced back one last time. Remy and Zion stood together by Cyrus' grave, no longer weighed down by despair, but held together by something stronger, hope. And in that quiet, sunlit cemetery, it felt like even the silence was smiling.